Well, today I'm not in my usual kind of place because my usual kind of place won't work today. But today's lesson is on flexibility, so I thought I'd practice what I preach and try to do something different. So let's give it a go. Flexibility is an essential component in intercultural interactions. Flexibility may seem like something that's really easy to talk about, really easy to do, until you're in situations where you actually need to use it. Or we often find that there are things that we can be flexible about and other things that are really hard to change. For example, you may be really flexible about food choices or types of behaviors, and yet other parts of it might be difficult, like when you eat your food or where you do those different kinds of behaviors. Here in Madrid is a perfect example of flexibility with food. While the food choices are really delicious, the timing of the food can be really difficult for some people. Breakfast is from 8 to 9 in the morning and typically just a piece of toast and some coffee. Lunch might not be until 2 or even 3 and can be extended for a long time. Dinner typically doesn't even start until 10 p.m. So if your body clock's not used to that, it can feel really, really challenging. So flexibility in intercultural situations means that you really have to learn to adapt to all sorts of differences in your host culture. Behaviors, attitudes, expectations, daily norms, etc. What often makes flexibility hard is not the little parts of being flexible, but it's the volume of things that you need to be flexible. It's the amount of things that you have to adjust to. I often find that I can spend a day being adaptable and flexible to little things along the way, not realizing that it's adding to my stress level until the end of the day, and the last one little thing that I have to adjust to or adapt to just puts me over the edge. So being aware that there are little things along the way that can cause stress and can eventually add up to a tipping point can be important to remember. Or you might find that there's just this one little thing that you can't ever get used to, and it really disrupts you. If it's the fact that you can't find coffee the way you like to take it, that can really disrupt your day if you rely on coffee to get up in the morning and get going. If the noise level at night keeps you awake, again, that can really disrupt you because it keeps you from being refreshed and ready for your day. So we do recognize that these kinds of things that seem really small can have deep-seated impacts because they impact your ability to adapt to the other things along the way. Flexibility can also be challenging because it can seem to threaten our core principles, the values that you've been socialized to hold. For example, the habits and patterns of interaction that you've been trained to believe are polite may not be so in your host culture, and vice versa. Recognize that I said that you've been trained to believe are polite. Politeness is a social construct. We teach our children to behave in ways that are polite according to our culture, and we reward them for doing so. The concept of being polite is universal, but the actual behaviors that signal politeness are not. For example, to greet someone, you might shake their hand, bow, or kiss them on the cheek. All of these are polite depending on the context. Differences in greetings are pretty easy to detect, but what about differences that are harder to recognize and easier to misinterpret? For example, ways of storytelling and making conversation are very culturally bound. Here are some basic examples. Is it polite or not polite to get straight to the point? Americans generally think it's polite to be direct, and that being indirect or hedging is akin to lying. This may not be the case in other cultures, where being indirect is polite. Another example is ways of making requests, asking for information, or even thanking people. The words and the style may vary. How effusive you are with your praise and your thanks, how indirectly you ask questions, can all signal things. They can alternatively create either too much informality or too much distance, and it takes some time to figure out that balance. Let me give you an example from here in Spain. If you're sitting at the table with a bunch of family and friends, and you need them to pass you something from across the table, you would simply say,
Primica, pásame una servilleta, ¿no? Gracias.
Now, for a lot of Americans, we grew up with this concept of asking for things. So, for example, we're taught to say, "Could you pass the salt?" and to use please and thank you. This is not the case in many places in Spain. In Spain, this direct imperative of "pass me the salt" without a thank you afterwards or a please with it is much more typical. So you can learn to adapt to that, but it can feel really alien to not say please and thank you because we're so indoctrinated to do that. We can recognize that that's what we're supposed to do in this situation, but it can still feel like we're being impolite. To explain a little bit more about why this pattern of speech happens, let me talk for a minute about positive face and negative face. As humans, we have two very basic and competing needs. We have the need for affection and sociability and connection with others. This is often called positive face. And we have the need for autonomy and independence and the ability to be separate from others. This is called negative face. Face refers to this concept of how you want to engage and be known. It's not your physical face, like being happy or sad. And positive doesn't mean good. It's really more about the idea of magnets pulling people together. Likewise, negative doesn't mean bad, but it's like the opposite ends of magnets, pushing apart. So really, positive face means wanting to be seen and received as part of the group, wanting to be pulled towards others and connected, and treating others that way too, wanting them to feel included and connected. Negative face means wanting to be seen as an individual, wanting autonomy and to have some distance and possibly distinction, and treating others that way too, not presuming or providing chumminess. When you want to show that you are close to someone, that you're friendly, then you use ways to appeal to their positive face. When you want to create some distance or show some independence, you use negative face. In appealing to positive face, though, you are automatically ignoring negative face, and vice versa. So, if I want to appeal to your positive face, I might do things linguistically, like call you by a nickname, use slang and informal language, use really direct language, be really talkative, at least in American culture. If I want to show negative face, I might use more formal titles, more formal grammar, or be less talkative. Okay, so let's go back to the table situation. When we're at a table, we are with friends and family, so we would tend to be informal with them, meaning we would say things like, pass me the salt, give me the bread. But we also have this normative behavior around mealtime that includes this need to ask for things and say please and thank you. We don't see this at the table as creating distance in American culture. But in Spanish culture, that behavior of using please and thank you and asking questions signals distance. It doesn't make sense at the table. At the table, with friends and family, you want to create closeness. And closeness is created linguistically by being informal, being direct, and not using a lot of politeness and honorifics. So learning new politeness behaviors takes a tremendous amount of flexibility to expand on that training that you've had your whole life. Again, recognize that I use the word training. I'm not asking you to change your values or your beliefs on politeness behaviors, but to add to them, to add something to your repertoire of politeness behaviors, and to recognize that others are not being intentionally impolite, but are drawing upon their own upbringing and training. To be flexible, you need to practice intellectual flexibility, or the way you think about things, behavioral flexibility, or the way you do things, and affective flexibility, or the way you feel about things. Intellectual flexibility is a hallmark of human intelligence, something that generates innovation and creativity. So learning this skill while you're abroad can translate into wonderful benefits in many other contexts in your life. Behavioral flexibility is, of course, learning how to do things differently or do new things. For many people, this may be where you feel most prone to embarrassment of making mistakes or not knowing what to do. My advice to you is to give yourself a little grace. You will make mistakes. You will feel a little silly. But I find that most people in the world are gracious if you extend grace first. Smile, apologize, connect, and try again. Affective flexibility is being flexible about how you feel about things. This means avoiding the temptation to negatively judge differences, like saying they're stupid, archaic. Affective flexibility means finding a rationale or a value or a truth that the other person holds that makes that difference make sense to them.
Something people ask me, and I sometimes ask myself, is how to tell if adapting to someone else's behaviors will be appreciated or rejected. In other words, are you allowed to say or do something that's exclusive to the culture? Or is it cultural appropriation? Will others see it as appropriate and welcome you in? Or will they judge it as inauthentic and intrusive? Undoubtedly, it's going to feel inauthentic to us, and maybe to others, when we initially try something new. For example, I'm not from Texas, but I've lived in Texas for a long time. But y'all is not something I grew up saying, and sometimes I feel like an imposter when I say it. Sometimes, though, it rolls off my tongue. So am I an imposter? Am I allowed to say it? Is it exclusive to native-born Texans? Do native Texans welcome it when a non-native Texan says it? The answer, of course, is it depends. The same is true of cultural behaviors, cultural clothing, and cultural lingo. Generally, though, I find that if your intentions are to be respectful and appropriate, people will appreciate that. I sometimes see this kind of cycle. First, initial attempts to try something new because it's exotic. We have no expectation of getting it right, and we may feel very comfortable laughing at our attempts or seeing ourselves as silly. 2. Practicing fitting in but feeling like an imposter. This may be after we've acclimated a bit or have seen the cultural item in practice and think we understand it, but it's still a little foreign to us. These attempts often lead to feeling awkward, disheartened, and inauthentic. And then finally 3, feeling more natural. However, this only comes after lots of attempts and some discomfort, of course. Certainly, there are times we get it wrong, but that's okay. Developing a sense of humbleness and an awareness of others' perspectives is exactly what global competencies are all about.
So my tips for flexibility and adaptability are to remember, first and foremost, you might not get it right some of the times. It's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn. It's okay to have frustrations. It's okay to have those negative feelings that you sometimes need to vent. And then you take a deep breath. You look for the things that you can solve, the things that you can change, the ways that you can adapt, and you try again. With practice, flexibility can become a habit that not only makes your time abroad more enjoyable, but helps you grow and see new possibilities. Who knows what you'll discover when you try it?